What is up, everybody? Pastor with no answers back at you. Here's the pastor with no answers, Joey Svendsen. Hope everybody is doing well. I want to share a few things that have been going on in my head. I think maybe it's a little therapeutic to get this stuff out. I feel like I'm talking to a friend right now. But, I'm being serious when I say that something that has kind of been weighing on my heart for this new year is for me to be less concerned about things in this world. And what I mean by that is really caring about things that at the end of the day are somewhat senseless to care about. Having a certain amount of money, or having certain acceptance from other people, or being understood from other people, or having a certain level of notoriety on the internet, or just you name it. I want to be less and less tied to that. In fact, I want to be completely free from all that. And I was actually praying this morning, and I think maybe it was the Holy Spirit, but I actually prayed and it just came out, and I was like, I love that. That's going to be my motto for the rest of the year. I asked God, help me to be more full of you and less full of and yes, I said it. It turns out that God is a little more mature and can handle that kind of language more than a lot of people can. He realizes it's just words. But I was thinking another thing, and a lot of you guys know that I have been on a pretty profound spiritual journey, I guess you could call it. Lots of change, lots of figuring stuff out and questions and all of that. And I feel like the dust is kind of settling a little bit and I'm getting settled in. But I can't help but to think of what the very nature of having so many denominations, what does that tell us about spirituality, even within Christianity? There's so many denominations, and so many of them believe so differently. Some of them believe that the other ones are completely wrong, while the ones that are supposedly completely wrong thinks the other ones are completely wrong. Shouldn't that clue us in that we are all trying to figure stuff out? And, I would say a huge portion of the listenership of this podcast I have heard many times, and I resonate with these sorts of sentiments. It's kind of like I don't know what to think anymore. There's so much I don't know what to believe anymore, but I can't get away from this person named Jesus. He's something that is real to me, and I can't give that up. There's no way, because it's everything to me, and I don't know what I would do without it, and I truly believe in him. But everything else I'm not sure of. I really am not sure of. I know to love other people as well. And it hit me. I was like, you know what? There's a scripture that backs that approach up. 1 Corinthians 2:2. So I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus and him crucified. So it turns out that a lot of this progressive thought and what many people would maybe call heresy is backed up by Paul himself. It's kind of like throwing away everything, relearning, except for Jesus and him crucified. Want you to enjoy this episode with Fletcher. You guys know that a lot of you know that I am in a faulty way over interested in things like SexBots. Now, before you lose your mind, I'm not interested in actually having one or taking part in activity with one, but the moral implications of that and how this can affect society. And I mean, we're there. We are there. It's not something that we are looking towards the future, but it's something that's very intriguing to me. Fletcher, gosh, he has so much knowledge about so many other things, but he's a social futurist. He actually has the he has credentials of a pastor, but he does not lead a church or any of that, but the implications of, how do I say this, just the future is, just having one conversation with Mal, it just opened my eyes to all the things that are going on and unfolding that are going to have such weighty implications that we're not even aware of, we're not thinking of. It's pretty crazy stuff. So from SexBots to Robopastors, I hope you enjoy this conversation with the one and only Mal Fletcher. Awesome. Well, we are here with Mal Fletcher, and I'm really excited about this conversation. I want to go ahead and give myself permission. It's my podcast, so I can do that. I don't want to beat around the bush when it comes to it. Initially, we're going to talk about sex and robot sex and that sort of thing. It's so crazy because most people are really into transparency, but then they get a little squirmy when it comes to sex, and it's like the most common thing ever, and it's one of the best things too. So I think we can be super frank with sex and not be dishonoring. But I got an email from someone that I think helps you out, Mal. And when I saw sex dolls and robot pastors, I was like, yes, for sure. I love talking about, for some reason, the morality behind sex robots is just so intriguing. The implications for the future. So first of all, tell people who you are and why in the world am I talking to you about sex dolls, sex doll robots?
Well, I can't answer the last one. I'm not sure about your motivations yet, but we're basically speaking about the future, I guess, Joey, because I'm a futurist, a social futurist. I've been working in the field for almost 40 years. I'm also in my homeland, Australia. I live in the UK now, but I'm known there as a minister because I have been an accredited minister, still am. I just don't lead a church. I prefer to speak through the media, through civic engagement with politicians and others. So we're talking about the future today.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, give us an up. Do you mind if we camp out with sex robots for a little bit here?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. Do you, how knowledgeable are you with the advancement of them? How common are they? Are we talking about something that 100 people have access to, thousands? What's the cost? Are they available for private use? Where are we at with that? Or are you even aware?
Well, I'm not sure of the cost for most of these units, but they are. I mean, they're in the thousands in most countries now. They're not as consumer viable in many countries, but they're there. And the technology is there, certainly, and has been for a long time. And it started back about 10 years ago when a group of academics at the University of Wellington, New Zealand, Joey, did a study and came out with a finding that robotic prostitutes, in their view, will take over from the human variety within 30 years. And they said this would be good. Yeah, this would be a good thing, they said, because one, it would stop sex tourism in places like Southeast Asia. And secondly, It would reduce the spread of HIV/AIDS. Now, whether those two things are accurate or not, time will tell. But I have other reservations about this particular use of robotics.
Gosh, it's so interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do before we move on to robot pastors is I'm going to throw out 10 different scenarios, and I want you to, if you can, and any of these, feel free to say, I don't want to talk about that, moving on to the next one. But I want to talk either morality with these scenarios or kind of like a future implication sort of thing. And for my listeners, all of this is from a guy's perspective, and there's a reason for that. I am a guy, and I want to say also it may sound like I have a certain posture about the topics at hand, but I don't know what I think about most of this stuff. So just hear this as a exploratory conversation with a subject that I am very curious about. So Paul says it's best not to get married, but if you burn with lust, go ahead, get married. Don't burn with lust. So why not have a sex doll and be like Paul?
Well, I think that one of the problems with sex dolls and sex bots now is the objectification of the human body and what that does to the way we relate to one another outside of sex. So if a man, for example, and we're both men, is having all of his sexual experience with a machine, he begins to treat women as literal objects. There's a lot of studies being done in the UK in the last 10 years that show a clear link between heavy use of pornography, for example, and the early breakdown of marriages, which says that if we learn to objectify human beings, we have real trouble relating to them, either as parents or as, in friendships and certainly in marriages, especially when that other person is a person of the opposite biological sex. There's also the issue, though, Joey, of what I call cybersex. In some parts of the world now, cybersex is cited in divorce courts quite a lot. People, men and women, having close and sometimes erotic, even sexual relationships with folks they've never met except online.
Wow. Yeah.
And you combine that with what we call haptic technology, which is tech that fools the senses. And most of our listeners are familiar with VR and what that does. But now we're developing tech that fools not only sight, sound, and touch, but smell and taste. So we're getting to the stage now where someone can have a truly interactive sexual relationship online without ever being in the same room, as it were. You combine that, though, with what we're doing in robotics now, and there are many exciting and good things about robotics we can talk about if you want to, but we're anthropomorphizing machines. We're making them appear human, and we're giving them the ability to emulate human emotion as what we call social bots that were first developed in Japan. And so that you bring that all together, haptic technology, emotional bots, and the cybersex trend, and you're left with a situation where, for many people, it's just the next obvious step to go and have a relationship with a bot. That could eventually change marriage, again, in the sense that if someone says, well, hey, my relationship with machine is erotic, it's romantic, it's intimate, why can't I have a marriage with a machine? So there's lots of ramifications beyond just personal morality, I think.
For sure. And yes, I said sex dolls a while back, and I'm totally talking about sex bots. And I totally agree with you. That's one thing that when I was thinking this through, it was like, gosh, if sex bots become very common, it's interesting because people say, don't objectify women. That's, pornography increases that and all of that. But a sex bot is an object, so it's like you're not necessarily sinning, I guess, or mistreating that bot because it's just an object, but it's training yourself, to see. I mean, how can you separate that from all women and seeing them, all as objects? But so you said something about people basically getting to the point where they're just like, it's intimate, it's romantic. Why can't I have this with a robot? Like, so am I right to say that robots are, or artificial intelligence that they possess, it's still very complex spreadsheets, right? I mean, we're not talking robots that actually acquire real emotions or acquire consciousness. I can never say that word. So are people basically in their mind able to just bypass that? And someone says, I love this robot. I know this robot can't consciously love me, but it sure feels like it. So people will be able to mentally make that jump?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, especially when you get to the next iteration of artificial intelligence. People today talk about machine learning, but on the back of that now, very soon we have emerging now what we call deep learning, which is another word for that is artificial neural networks, for short, ANNs. These are networks of computers that process information in a similar way to your brain. So neural networks learn by example, not by having coding given to them. They learn by watching examples of a certain behavior, identifying patterns within the behavior, and then they infer rules on the back of those patterns. And doing all of that, they figure out how best to do something on their own. So they're basically self-programming machines. And this could be great news for, organizations like the church in many ways. But in terms of robotics and SexBots in particular, it just lends another layer of pseudo-reality to a relationship that isn't real at all. And as I said, one of the big problems ethically to come from that is what it does to the way we do relate to other human beings.
Right. Now, is there, if you haven't caught on by now, I'll just go ahead and tell you I'm not like a super smart person and not very knowledgeable about this stuff at all. So if this is like a dumb question, just tell me. But I'm totally not aware. Are there people that actually do believe that a robot can potentially acquire consciousness and real emotion? Is that a belief that some people possess, like that can eventually happen?
That's a great question, Joey. Look, I think there are certainly some people who believe that, but they don't tend to be in the mainstream of technological development. They're not the people that are actually building robots at the moment. There's a lot of, isn't there a blurred line sometimes between sci-fi and what the future will be? And some people are off on a sci-fi trip with this, and some people are more feet on the ground saying, well, okay, let's not talk about where we'll be in 60 years. Let's just try and get to 10 years first and then progress from there. And most of technologists, whilst they dream big, they're very realistic in terms of having their feet on the ground in the present. So that wouldn't be the mainstream view at the moment.
Gotcha. All right, so another scenario that I thought about, and this is we don't have to spend a lot of time with this, but the potential of a spouse or a husband or wife losing their spouse, so becoming a widow or a widower, and the possibility of having a robot that is modeled after the personality of their former spouse, because this person is saying, hey, she or he was the love of my life. I don't want a relationship with another person, but I do want sex and, masturbating. Just if I can have a robot that's just like my spouse, that's what I would prefer. What do you think about the morality of that, or the potential unhealthiness of that?
Well,
is it even possible, do you think?
Well, yes, there's no reason why a machine can't be built to look like someone else. We're doing that now. We've got robotic Einstein in some schools in America. It's built to intuit answers that Einstein would give to particular questions based on his writings and his speeches, and then giving those when kids ask a question. So yes, it's a possibility, but and I don't mean to be crass here, I really don't. I don't want to be offensive, but it's a bit like saying, my pet died, I'd like to clone my pet. You will always know that this isn't the real thing, that this machine husband or wife isn't the real thing. And so I'm back to having a relationship with a machine. It doesn't matter who I project them to be. The fact of the matter is that it's still a machine. So we still have to talk about the ethics of that.
Right. All right, so this will be the last one, and then I want to get to some broader issues. I'm sure you'll be thankful for that as well. But this one is the toughest one for me, because my starting point here is the safety of children. So listeners, please have some grace for me. That's my starting point, is the safety of children. Now, I've watched documentaries on child predators, sexual molesters, and I've actually this always I think I may have been in my teens when I saw this, and I heard a sexual predator actually say, "Keep me in jail because I cannot control this. Like, I will seek another child, so you got to keep me in jail. So we know that there are some child predators that are able to do what they do and not get caught. So 2 questions. First of all, the ethics behind having a sex bot that is more like that's built as a child. And then secondly, from a human perspective, would that not cut it for the child predator because they know that there's a robot? Like, would the child predator be satisfied with just the arousal, just the sex, or would even a predator say, no, I actually, this doesn't cut it. I want a kid with consciousness. And it's even creepy to talk about, but I thought about it. I was like, what if this was available and kids could be safe?
It's a legitimate question, Joey. It's not one that is often asked, I have to be honest. But my initial reaction would be that there's plenty of evidence now in reputable studies in different parts of the world that people who are inclined towards pedophilia, for example, may start out watching it online, right? They're not active, They're watching it. And one of the reasons the law has changed in many countries like the US and Britain to disallow watching this sort of pornography is that it does lead to activity. In too many cases, it leads people to act it out. Not in all, but in too many. And so if we extend that further and you allow a 3-dimensional machine to have that sort of relationship, quote unquote, with a person inclined towards pedophilia, then there's every reason to believe that they're just as likely to go out and want to act out that behavior with a real human being. And that use of robotics, which I think is a misuse of it, but that use of robotics, it's rife with all sorts of ethical and moral issues. And look, when it comes to the whole issue of sex outside of a partnership, a commitment,
right?
You've got, if you talk about ethics is always based in some sort of morality and moral worldview. And as a Christian, I would say, and we're talking, I guess, a little bit today about Christian view of this. And I have to be honest with the listeners, that's where I'm coming from, although I don't appear on the BBC or anything as a Christian anything. But that helps to form my worldview. I think that, you've got problems still with Jesus saying things like, if you imagine it in your mind, you've essentially, if you make a habit of imagining it anyway, you've essentially been doing it. And so I think with robots, we have to be very, very careful we don't project onto them too much human-like qualities as if they are human beings. It's dangerous for us to do so. Yeah.
Okay, so I lied. What you just said sparked one more question, and then we'll move on from this. But I have I know for a fact that there are people who are there's a lot of married couples that are not comfortable with this, but I know married couples that are comfortable with male or female videoing themselves doing a sexual act to themselves, so that when their spouse is on a business trip, they can look at that video and pleasure themselves and feel like they have that connection with their spouse, almost like cyber sex, except that person isn't present in any way, shape, or form. It's actually a video recording. So what's your opinion on that? And then would having a sex bot of your spouse on a business trip not just be a really advanced form of the same thing?
Well, of course, the challenge with that, again, is that you're not really relating to a real person. You're relating to an image of that person, whether it's a 2-dimensional video or a 3-dimensional robotic machine. So you're not relating to the person. And that's my point about the objectification of the human body. That can happen within a marriage. And the evidence of that is the degree of sexual violence we see between men and their wives in many parts of the world today. That's evidence of a form of objectification of someone else. I'm treating you, violence is the ultimate act of objectification of another person. I can do to you physically what I want because in my eyes you're an object. And I don't think it helps a man and a woman in their married life to have this sort of practice of objectifying the other person. It's far better to discipline yourself to wait, and I've done a lot of traveling over the last 40 years around the world, to wait until you get home or take your spouse with you if that's a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so generally robots, when the people that are on the ground floor designing them or thinking about the future, I want to hear what Mal believes the bright side of this. Like when we think of the advancement of technologies, specifically when it comes to robots, give us a snapshot of the bright spot of this advancement.
Oh, there's a lot of possibilities, my friend. I mean, robots are renowned already in many industries, and we talk about Industry 4.0, which is the replacement of the traditional factory with more machine-run, smaller units, all connected via the internet. And in many Industry 4 setups now, you have machines essentially running a factory on their own without any human interaction, or the small factories, as I say, connected up. And one of the great things about this is, of course, that human beings are freed up from mundane tasks. Our ideas are realized more quickly because the machine can do things quicker than we can. So we may be, in theory at least, free to have more ideas, to do a little more reflecting than we were able to do before. There are plenty of challenges with it on the flip side, like underemployment, which we might talk about in a moment. But some of the positives are just the release from mundanity, from the banal things that we don't really want to be doing. One of the challenges is transition, where our jobs change so quickly and we don't have time to change quickly enough with them because of automation. These are some of the challenges. So it's a bit of flip side of each strength is a weakness. There are many other. We could talk about some of the other, like nanorobotics in medicine. Nanorobots are bots that are tiny machines, microscopic, built from the atomic level up, that can be, in medicine, injected into your bloodstream, carrying certain helpful chemicals, which can then be injected into harmful cells, like cancer cells, so that they do what normal drugs can't do, in that they take out the bad cells while leaving the healthy ones alone. These are called nanobots in medicine. And that's a very helpful thing when you think about the possibilities of that. It's not yet consumer viable, but the technology is there.
Golly. All right, so I understand the factory part, and that is something that comes to mind as the possibility of being harmful to folks that depend on the mundane task. But before we talk about that, Is there a time in the future in which robots will be able to occupy professions that are not mundane, such as a doctor? Like you go into the doctor's office and you wait, and a robot walks in and says, "What is the problem? What are you going through?" And you basically tell them, and the robot knows how to respond. The robot knows how to check your vitals. The robot knows what prescription to give you. I mean, is that something that could happen?
Absolutely. And I'll cite the example in law, for example. In law right now, there are chatbots that are taking the place of lawyers in cases where people are being mischarged parking fines or speeding fines, and they write to they contact the chatbot, which is, of course, the listeners will know, it's a piece of software that allows us to communicate with machines in a very human-like, fluid way, almost like we're talking to a person. So they're using these apps now to argue their case against what they think are unjust speeding fines, and people in the UK have saved many thousands of pounds doing it this way. So law is affected. Journalism's affected right now, Joey. Forbes magazine occasionally uses a program called Quill to write entire articles without any human intervention.
My gosh.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's not all the articles, it's just some, but the possibility is there that within maybe 15 years of now, 50% or more of magazine articles might be written by machines. And let's face it, data mining allows them to do far better research. And because of the artificial neural network technology, they are able to learn to write in more human-like ways. Even the arts are affected by this. The arts, there's a computer network owned by the University of Malaga in Spain, which as of now has written not thousands, but millions of pieces of symphonic music in what's called the modernist classical genre. And London Philharmonic Orchestra 2 years ago played the first of these pieces to be written. It was the first time a live elite orchestra played something completely written by a machine. So even the arts are affected.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. Hey, have you seen the movie Ready Player One by any chance?
Oh, no, I haven't. My son, who's a filmmaker in Australia, he saw it and he said I should see it, but I haven't, no.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll tell you one thing about it is there, basically how it portrays humanity is there's, people live in almost like condominiums that are skyscrapers just to conserve space because there's so many people, but almost all the people spend all of their time in virtual worlds. So, you basically are peering through the windows of different people, and, they've got these goggles on and they're just doing crazy stuff, being entertained all day long like that, because everything else is being taken care of. I mean, am I missing something though that, what about money to buy food? Who's paying the electric bill and stuff? I mean, I know it's a movie, but is there something that I'm missing, or could our society turn into just this super lazy? Well, I mean, maybe not even lazy. Like maybe you are virtually in a world where you're exploring and, running through the woods and finding stuff and, but can we get to a place where everyone is just basically able to live for virtual entertainment?
Yeah, I mean, any of those dystopian movies are based on that sort of premise that we could really screw up big time. Or head in a direction and then maybe regret it later. And I think I like to say this, the technology is not destiny. Our future is not a product of the technologies we develop, but of how we choose to use those technologies. So it's human, there's no inevitability about this. It's human choice that makes the difference between a livable, even prosperous future and one that's probably less desirable. It comes down at the end of the day to the choices we make about technology, and the future is the product of human choices made today. That's why we have to stay on top, for example, of the ethics of things like SexBots, because the decisions we make on that have ripple effects in other areas as we move forward and tech gets even more sophisticated.
I mean, just between you and me right now, do you think that, just what we know about humanity, we're not going to make wise choices throughout this process? I mean, do you see any way that humanity as a whole will steward this technology well?
I think humanity
Do you have any optimism?
I do. I think I'm not a pure. Let me just explain the word optimism first, because we always think it means, in popular parlance, it's glass half full. But when the word first came to the English language from the French a couple of centuries ago, and when it emerged first in the English language, what it meant was not glass half full, but essentially glass half empty, but could be full. And that's very different. It's a sort of a realism with a dash of hope. That's what optimism originally meant. And I'm in that sense an optimist. I'm a realist, but I have a dash of hope. I think that human beings have it within themselves to make good choices. If we want to use theological terminology, which we're not normally doing in this interview, and I wouldn't normally, but it seems appropriate, there is an echo still of the image of the Creator in all of us. And I do think sometimes the dystopian movies play up the other side to tell a story, but they leave off the fact that we still make good choices a lot of the time, even with sophisticated technologies.
Yeah, because I mean, let's celebrate a little bit like what humans are accomplishing here, and I mean, it's kind of beautiful when you think of the progress and the things that they're discovering, and hopefully a cure for cancer is around the corner. Is that something that robots could eventually get to a place where they can research better than humans and have maybe a quicker timeline in discovering cures for stuff like cancer?
Yeah, well, already because of things like machine learning and ANN technology, machines can research far quicker than us. They can allow us to collect. Well, data mining is already happening. We all know that our social media accounts, our health apps are being mined for data, and big companies are essentially selling that to the marketers who pitch products at us, which, by the way, leads to digital overload, but that's another story. All of that already is happening. Data mining is already going on, but you add to that this capacity of machines now to think in more human-like ways. And it means they can not only research, they can analyze the research better than we can. So they can feed us the information we need so that if we choose to, we can make a good choice with it. That's true in medicine. It's true in architecture right now. It's true certainly in robotics right now. So yeah, machines can be a great benefit to us in that regard. Imagine you could take, for example, all of the wisdom of, say, the last 200 years, great thinkers of the last 200 years on any ethical subject or anything relating to technology at all, and write that up in a sort of précis fashion in modern terminology, in a way that's accessible to most thinking people. That's what ANNs will allow us to do. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Gosh.
You think...
All right, so that...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you think about the possibilities of going back to historical figures and finding out what they say about any of the things we're talking about today, or any of the human aspects of these things. And we might be able to arrive at wisdom, because today we have a lot of knowledge. We don't necessarily have an overflow of wisdom, knowing how to apply knowledge in righteous or good ways. So we may be able to get access to great wisdom in that way, aided by machines, where the machine is the servant, not the master.
So that made me think of the following scenario. So let's say there's a seventh grader in the year 2185, and obviously there's you can poke a lot of holes in this scenario, because if the technology was there for this to be able to be done, then school would just have to be completely revamped. But let's say it hasn't been discovered yet, but this seventh grader figured it out, or he has a really smart dad that figured out he has to do a report on Turkey and the country of Turkey, and there's, the following 5 things that need to be researched. Would that seventh grader not only be able to have that paper written for him, but have that paper written for him in a way that sounds like a seventh grader, so that teacher won't catch on to the fact that something else wrote the paper for him? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much the technology exists today. Again, it's just not consumer viable. So yeah, it's perfectly possible for that to happen. And of course, that's where regulation and checks and balances have to follow technology. They're never quite ahead of technology, but they have to follow quickly. I said before that one of our responsibilities, all of us, is just to keep in touch with changes in technology without being experts, just to keep a little bit in touch, so that we ensure governments and businesses build regulations that keep our ethics in line with our technology. At the moment, our tech tends to run faster than our ethics can keep up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So we will need to, for instances like the one you've cited, there obviously needs to be some regulation. Otherwise, children would just pass everything and there'd be no real education going on. They wouldn't learn anything.
Right. I mean, is it possible that as a society we stop valuing education, or at least a huge sect of people? Because right now, I mean, you could make a case for, I don't need to know anything about Turkey. I've got Google. Just ask me anything, I'll find out for you. I mean, it seems like there could be a possibility where people are like, man, let's just shortcut everything. You know, there's a bunch of smart people working on ways in which we can find anything that we want to know. But hopefully we don't get to that point where we don't value education.
No, I don't honestly think we will in the mainstream, because there's a joy in creativity and innovation. There's something about the human psyche that loves the idea of innovation, which is the practical application of creativity to solve a practical, pragmatic problem. So and that requires education. It requires a level of know-how. It's one thing to have a good idea. It's another thing to be able to build it, to be able to make it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that human beings will ever lose that joy, to be honest.
Yeah. I like that. All right. So as far as robots impeding on people's ability to make money, because there's a lot of very respectable people that make a honest living on very mundane tasks. So how does that play out, in which a lot of these people have a hard time finding work, and how far out are we from that actually being an issue that, presidential candidates are debating about?
Well, it's very close now, because, as I've said, it's a realistic prediction, if you like, that within the next 20 years, something like 800 million jobs worldwide will be automated. And as I said before, it is professions as well as manual labor jobs that are affected. Now, someone who's listening to this might rightly point out, well, hey, Mel, new technologies always bring new jobs too. And that's true. There were no typesetters before we had the printing press. But the trouble this time, the problem now, is that we have the challenge of keeping up with the change. That's our challenge. Can we transition quickly enough, not just from one job to another, but from one entire livelihood to another? Most of us don't change our entire livelihood that many times in a lifetime, but that could become a lot more common. It will in the next 20 years. So what we need to be doing is finding ways to teach people from a very young age, even primary school level, transition skills that will help them deal with, say, the anxiety of change, the sense of loss of identity that comes with losing a job and getting a new one, those sorts of things that cognitive behavioral therapy can help people with and can be self-administered anyway. I think that should be taught to all young people at some point, so that they learn how to make transition, because it will happen.
Right. Goodness gracious. All right. So we've, a lot of people have seen the movies. Some people I would imagine even have real fear about this. I've picked up little bits and pieces of things that you've said, and it sounds like robots are being created in a way where they can, quote unquote, self-learn and become more advanced independently. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, fairly independently in some areas, yes.
Okay. Is it possible that we accidentally create some robots that decide that the best thing for them is to one-up humanity and take over, to be in charge, even if they have to do so in violent measures?
Perfectly possible. I'm not sure that, for reasons I'll go into in a moment, I'm not sure that it's going to happen quite that way, but it is possible. And certainly if we continue to talk about weaponizing robots, at the moment, most of the larger military services of the world have what we call semi-autonomous machines. So that a drone, for example, is semi-autonomous. It is driven by a human pilot remotely, but it can adjust its own trajectory according to weather changes, right? What it can't do is decide who its target's going to be. But we know there's research being done in several countries, including the US, but others as well, into fully autonomous machines that can make those sort of battlefield, on-the-ground decisions, life and death decisions.
Yeah.
And there are big ethics questions with that about what that means to our value for human life. We become even more separated from a battlefield. There's no human element at all. what happens to our value for life, what happens to generals who decide to blame the machine, say it wasn't my doing, I didn't make the mistake, all sorts of things. That makes it a little easier for us to get to weaponized robots and robots that are autonomous in ways that aren't healthy for human beings. On the whole, though, I have to say there's one thing that I don't think robots can do and likely ever will do, and that is empathize. Empathy requires the ability to call upon a shared human experience. And anybody that's listening who's a counselor knows this to be true. By definition, a machine cannot have. It can emulate it in the same way that today's social bots emulate human emotion, but it's not the same thing as the real thing.
Do you think that humans will ever evolve to a place where they don't care, like the emulated empathy is good enough?
No, I don't. I'm not sure that most people will. Again, we come back to the essential human nature. And human nature, though our technology changes hugely through the millennia, human nature doesn't really change that much. And one of the things about being a futurist is you have to have an appreciation for history, because it's axiomatic. It sounds trite, but it's an axiom that you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. You can't project forward beyond the present if you don't know where you came from in the first place. And history teaches us that most of the psychological and emotional issues we face today existed before. In some cases, they have new expressions today, but loneliness, despair, depression, joy, celebration, exhilaration, all of those things have existed since human beings have been on the planet. So I don't think some things change all that much. There's actually a fundamental premise in futurism, Joey, that goes like this. The future won't be that much different to the present. It won't be totally unrecognizable to us. Here's an example.
Yeah.
If I come visit you in Carolina, if I come down to the States, fly from London to see you, I am coming in a machine that has been updated to, it's almost a flying robot now, right?
Yeah.
But it was built, if it's a jumbo jet, it was built in the 1970s. So the future is not that, it's not totally unrecognizable when we get there. There's always things about it that carry over from the present. And one of the common themes is always human nature and how it informs change.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, yeah, that connects generations for sure. I like that outlook. So let's talk about the empathy piece with a therapist. Let's say someone says, "Hey, I just want good therapy. I've gone through a lot of stuff and I'm going through a lot of stuff. I have major depression and I know that's connected to some unhealthy patterns of thought. I don't care if a therapist has empathy for me or not. I just want really good advice." That seems to be somewhat that doesn't seem unbelievable to me. I could see a person, especially like an introvert, taking that approach. Hey, as long as I get good therapy, it's good enough for me.
Well, I would say that person can do that now. As you said, just go to Google, ask Alexa, what do I do about X? And you'll get an answer. Advice is not, though, the full component of therapy. Here's an example of that. I was speaking to a medico friend of mine recently, a very well-known doctor in parts of the UK. And he said, when I was at university I was at med school studying medicine. He said, most people were there for the humanity of it. Today, he said, a lot of it is about the science of medicine. And he said, I do think that has fundamentally changed the way, in some parts of the world, medicine is conducted. Now, that's not true for every medical service or every medico. Many medicos are wonderful therapeutic people. But therapy assumes that you're able to do more than give advice. You're able to enter into the experience of that person at least enough to see the world the way they do for a little while and to see the feeling, to feel the feelings behind the words they're saying. Alexa can't do that. Google can't do that. ANNs can't do that because there's no shared human experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I'm gonna. I'm actually a pastor, so I'm gonna have fun picking on something that maybe I could see the church doing in the future. Let's say a really crooked church. Do you see there being scenarios in which people like let's say there's a church that they are able to create a robot that can just knock it out of the park when it comes to a sermon. There's, the perfect blend of humor and theology and touching on the Greek and giving life application. I mean, just an unbelievable teaching robot. And the people that go to that church have no idea that there's actually a robot that's teaching them. Like, will it be possible to put robots in positions in which people would actually prefer a human, but quite frankly, they don't know that it's not?
Well, that creates an ethical problem. And if the people were to find out, the evidence we've got so far is that they wouldn't like that very much. I mean, Google, you may remember early this year, did a thing with its duplex. It set up a test with its duplex system, highly intelligent artificial intelligence, and this machine was talking to people on the phone, and they didn't know they were talking to a machine. When they found out later, they were most annoyed about it. So it's all very well to say to people, we will have a machine speak to you today, but you've got to declare that in advance. Otherwise, there's nothing particularly Christian about it.
Oh, I agree. But is it possible? Like, will robots be so realistic that they could give a sermon and the people don't even know it's is that even something that could happen? Or are there things about robots, even subtle, that you're like, wait a second, did you just see that? That's not a real person.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the actual physical tech is getting more and more sophisticated, and it's easier to fool us. Look at fake news, deep fakes rather. Look at that. Most people can see it's fake, but they're getting more sophisticated, and there are ways to get around that. But I think when it comes to where you're essentially asking, can the work of a pastor be done by a robot? Not specifically preaching, you're saying, and teaching. I think the answer to that is yes, it can be, if the pastor's work is defined as mainly liturgical, running a service, giving a sermon, reading the scriptures. Yes, a robot can do that now. But when it comes to, again, those empathic aspects of ministry life, the showing of empathy, the development of empathy in our context, leadership, teaching, and turning that empathy into programs that bring change in the community, that's a very human thing. And I think that if pastors, if anyone's listening to this is a pastor, play up those aspects of your work and you'll never be out of a job.
Yeah. All right. So you said, robot, as far as the liturgy and preaching and teaching and all that stuff, that can happen right now. Well, so practically, let's say I have all the money in the world and I'm a crooked person, and I want to have that robot do that stuff so I can miss a bunch of Sundays and have this quote unquote assistant pastor fill in for me, and I can pay for this thing and then not have to pay a salary. So practically, where do I order this thing? Or is it just in the hands right now of scientists that have gotten to that point where it's possible, but it's not something that's accessible?
Yeah,
or can I go get one right now?
No, you can't get one right now. It's a little bit like holographic projection. I mean, we know holographics is used now in music festivals to quote unquote bring back to life dead artists. It's used in politics in France in 2017. One politician, one candidate for the French presidency, stood on 11 platforms across France at one time, live, speaking to 11 different audiences through holographic projection. The same principle of me not being there, but replacing myself with a technology. But people knew it's a hologram. That's the difference. And so to do it and to do it with a robot, for example, and not to declare that you're doing it would be the ultimate, I think, abuse of a ministry position. And
For sure.
yeah, and at the end of the day, we all know that eventually these things are found out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's close this thing out by, and I'll give you time if you want to ponder a little bit, but give us 3 jaw-dropping zingers of things that are in the making, or maybe implications that common folk like myself, we just haven't even thought about, possibilities that we haven't thought about, dangers that we haven't thought about. Let's close out the show with 3 zingers.
3 zingers. Okay. That could be a podcast in itself, couldn't it, Joey? You could make that something. 3 zingers.
I like it.
Come on, it's catchy. I think, well, look, one is my background is in architecture. I studied architecture originally. The spatial environment is changing the way we build buildings. We're starting to build now responsive buildings. By that, I mean buildings that have reflective glass that changes temperature changes reflectivity according to the temperature changes outside. So it will let in more heat or shut out more heat. Walls that are porous that can open and close when you weave a piece of material, you have an open and close weave. You can do that now with some buildings. So that's technology that exists now but isn't being used a lot yet. Environment. You've got mobile wind farms being developed now. They're off the coast of Aberdeen, Scotland. Statoil, Norway's biggest oil company, is working with British people to build these mobile offshore wind farms. You can tow these turbines out to any part of the ocean, wherever the the wind yield is greatest. And it's all driven automatically by data mining and ANN computers. So these are not static wind turbines. These are towable they can be moved anywhere in the ocean on any given day. That's not happening yet, but it's about to. Energy farms. In Germany, there are thousands now of these small dairy farms that are doubling as solar farms and biogas plants that are now generating 5 times more power than the local village needs, and they're selling it back to the national grid. That's not happening worldwide yet, but it soon will be. And by the way, with the environment, I think it's very important that we talk up some of the positive news about the environment and what's being done.
Yeah.
We're not doing enough, but there are some good things being done. And the reason for that is you can't bring change to a culture you've already declared your enemy. You have to be able to engage with some hope in order to take things forward. So there's architecture, the environment, the economy. There are so many changes with blockchain currencies and so on. I'm a little concerned about cashlessness if we go fully cashless, because people are already spending without forethought. Cash is messy, it's bulky, but it has weight. You can feel it leaving your pocket. and our debt levels are going up in Britain and America now, partly because of cashless payment systems. So we're going to need to address that. But there's a couple of things people can think about.
Yeah, for sure. Now, so last question, as from a Christian perspective, and I kind of think a lot of, I know I've been here, I've kind of held on to this, and now I'm not quite sure, but I've often, for a long part of my life, I've thought, once we get to a point where we're able to, replicate human beings and genetically engineer exactly the child that we want, and basically start playing God in areas, I've thought, God shut down the folks trying to build the Tower of Babel. I think there's going to be a time when God steps in and says, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to close up shop and go ahead and wrap up this chapter in humanity and start, what we've talked about or what we talk about as the end times, or, the second coming, or, what have you.
Yeah, I think as a Christian, an evangelical Christian, yes, I believe that the Bible speaks about a literal timeline. We don't know when that will occur, but it will eventually occur. Christ will return, and we'll see the physical manifestation of the kingdom that Jesus taught us about, the values that Jesus taught us on an international scale. I think what's important in all that, Joey, is that we maintain the attitude that Christians are not theologically bound to be either pessimistic or anti-tech, that we're not Luddites looking to smash the machines. We're, in fact, through history, often the early adopters and adapters of new tech. I don't know if you know this, but John Wesley built one of the first electric machines in history.
Wow.
He did it as a hobby because he was just interested in electricity. So we're early adopters, and we're for progress, but we don't like progressivism. I think that's fair to say. We don't believe that all change is good change. We're not ultra pragmatist. We don't say if a thing can be done, it should be done now. If we're sound in our biblical understanding, we might sometimes say, look, let's just pause a moment to think about the future ramifications of emerging techs and let, as I said, our ethics catch up to our tech. But at the end of the day, we are not escapist. We're not people saying, we're just going to hang on now until God tends to wrap things up. Our job is to be the city on a hill that cannot be hidden. Our job is to bring a foretaste, if you like, of the kingdom in the here and now. Let people see what that coming kingdom is going to be like, even in a fallen world. I think that's what Jesus meant by city on a hill, by the way. He meant that we are in microcosm what the city could be if it lived under the values that he taught, the kingdom values. So you think about that, and it puts a whole different spin on what we're called to do. We're not just here to wait until, drive up in a pickup into the hills with a bunch of baked bean tins and Willie Nelson and a dog and a shotgun waiting for Jesus to come back. I don't mean to be... Forgive me if that sounds cynical to some people, but
that sounds like my dad, man. I'm offended.
Well, I don't mean to offend your dear father.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
But there is a lot of that, not just in America. There's a lot of that around the world, and it's not the thinking I don't think that we need to have in these times.
I like it. I'm gonna even slap a amen on that. And I will say this: I think it's super neat hearing your evangelical posture and the fact that you're immersed in the future. I mean, even call yourself a futurist. I mean, I think that is that's very refreshing. I guess I don't encounter that a lot. All right, so I'm looking at 2020plus.net. Is that the best place for people to read your stuff and keep up with the things that you write, or is there a different place for people to go?
Well, there's a lot of places. That's the main website, 2020plus.net. It's actually it's just being rebranded now to 2030plus because we've got another decade.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now. I was like, wait a second, it says 2030 after you go that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 2020plus.net is the address. There's a lot of stuff there. Most of my media interviews around the world are actually on that website on a lot of issues. Some of my talks to civic groups, to university students and others as a social commentator and futurist are there. But there's also social media, Joey. Twitter is just simply @MalFletcher. It's M-A-L, not Mal as in Gibson, Mal Fletcher. Yep. On Twitter, the same on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, we get a lot of professional people all over the world every day joining up on LinkedIn because we're able to talk about things a little more deeply there. Instagram, there's stuff there, especially videos @MalFletcher again. So most of the social media, I'm not on Facebook for reasons I won't go into. They're to do with ethics. But, it's all out there. 2020plus.net's the first place you should go.
Awesome. Man, this has been very interesting. Maybe one of my favorite conversations I've had thus far. So I really appreciate it. I hope it was worth your time, and I thank you very much.
No, Joey, it was certainly worth my time, my friend. When anybody asks really good questions, I feel drawn to that person. It's a sign of not just intelligence, it's a sign of wanting the best for themselves, but also the environment and other people around them, and the service you do your listeners. I just want to commend you to keep doing it. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. That means a lot. I appreciate it. You have a good one now. We may have to have you back on sometime.
I'd love that, man. You have a good day.